than initially expected. So a round of applause for coming out with it. We do appreciate that. I will ask, we did want to preserve the seats in front, the chairs, especially the shade, for our senior community members. So if you would like to gather a seat, there are still some available here. There's some that say elected official. Please ignore that. We have now asked our elected officials to stand. So you can, but truly, if you need to grab a seat, please, or grab some shade, please come in and grab some. Well, first off, I'll say hello. My name is Raul Peralez. I am the council representative for District 3, which is right here where we're at in downtown San Jose. Thank you. And my office helped to sponsor and pull together the event as well as the effort on the resolution. So it's my pleasure and honor to be your MC for today's event. Thank you. A couple of logistics. There are public restrooms in the park just half a block up here. So if you are eager to, our event is about to last just under an hour. So they're just up here. So we appreciate that. Thank you. And we have quite a list of dignitaries that have joined us today, and I'd like to welcome them all. If you would please, with me, we're going to try and keep our applause to the one clap. But if you get excited and you want to cheer, you can go ahead and cheer as well. So we have a number of speakers that I'll be introducing as well, but with us today in the audience we have from the office of our Vice Mayor Chappie Jones, David Gomez. We have Councilwoman Deb Davis, Councilmember David Cohen, Councilmember Pam Foley, and I apologize, those are all my colleagues, council members with the City of San Jose. We have from the office of San Jose Councilmember Maya Esparza, we have Michael Pierce. We have Assemblymember Alex Lee. We have Supervisor Susan Ellenberg, Santa Clara County Supervisor. The Mayor of Saratoga, Mayor Emily Lowe. Excuse me, former Mayor of Saratoga. My apologies, former Mayor of Saratoga and board member of the Hacconi Foundation is Emily Lowe. Your current Mayor of Saratoga is Yan Zhao. Saratoga Union School Board Trustee, we have Phyllis Tung. And we have the Vice Mayor of Fremont, Mayor Yang Xiao. Trustee of Los Gatos Saratoga Union High School Board, we have Trustee Cynthia Cheng. Trustee for Los Gatos Saratoga Union High School District, Catherine Singh. And we have here representing District 4 for Councilmember of Santa Clara, we have Kevin Park. We have our District Attorney, Jeff Rosen. We have Honorable Jacqueline Arroyo, Judge in Santa Clara County. As well, Honorable Johnny Gogo, Judge in Santa Clara County. We have former Assemblymember and various Union School Board member, Kansen Chu. We have Mayor of Mountain View, Ellen Kamei. And the Director for our San Jose Office of Racial Equity that helped pull together the event for today, Zulma Maciel. Thank you for your patience. If you are here and are an elected or representing an elected, you can please find one of my staff members right here raising their hand, and we'll make sure to give you a recognition in our closing remarks. So as I just mentioned, I'd like to recognize our Office of Racial Equity led by Zulma Maciel and her team that helped us to not only pull together today's event, but the entire effort of the resolution, as well as the listening sessions that we hosted earlier this year. Round of applause. Thank you so much to our new Office of Racial Equity. So yesterday, our council unanimously passed this resolution apologizing to our Chinese American immigrants here for our past racial acts. Clearly by the turnout, we know that this is a profound act being taken up by the City of San Jose, especially for our Chinese American community members here in the city of San Jose, and for descendants of our own very own former Chinatowns, much like where we stand today, where the original Chinatown in the city of San Jose once stood. In 1987, at the 100-year anniversary of the initial removal of the Chinatown here in this area, our then mayor, Tom McHenry, and our late councilwoman for the area and former mayor Susan Hammer put together a recognition and a plaque, which actually before you leave you're welcome to see on the other side of the Fairmont here. And that plaque was also an apology and a recognition of the past atrocities that were perpetrated by our local government here in the city of San Jose, that ultimately were the demise of not only this Chinatown, but of all 5 former Chinatowns here in the city of San Jose. What did not happen 34 years ago was a formal resolution that would be able to live through the rest of time here in the city of San Jose. And what we had an opportunity to do this year now is to now enact the resolution, which our mayor will actually read following me, and we will be able to now honor that permanently here in the city of San Jose. In total, all 5 Chinatowns were actually right here within the district that I represent, the district at the time that then Councilwoman Susan Hammer represented, which is why it was important for us as representatives of this community to honor and recognize that history, not only with this resolution, but here in this special place that we are at today, that without these acts would have still stood a prominent Chinatown with the honor and history that they have provided to our community, to build this community here, along with ancestors of mine, immigrants that we know that have not only built up a city like the city of San Jose, but our country. And unfortunately, as we've seen, and this wasn't just an issue 150 years ago, wasn't just an issue 34 years ago, unfortunately, this issue of xenophobia, racism, continues. It has continued throughout our country. That wound was opened up over the last few years, perpetrated through the coronavirus, perpetrated through elected leaders at our highest level, encouraging and giving an opportunity for racism in our country to rear its head. And it hit us here close at home as well. As we saw a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes here in the city of San Jose, especially with those happening here, right here in the heart of my district, we helped pull together an effort of community members, an effort again led by our Office of Racial Equity, listening sessions with our AAPI community to ask what more could our local government do. And out of those listening sessions, one idea came forward that we had no idea that it would rise to this level of importance and interest. But it was an idea with a simple message to, number one, say I'm sorry. To recognize, acknowledge the history that our own local government, our own past leaders, our own past mayors and council members here in the city of San Jose perpetrated. Something we have to take ownership for. But also, to not only honor and recognize that, it's important that we know this history so that we don't repeat those mistakes again. I want to say thank you to a few special people, and they'll be speaking with us today as well. But today's event, and specifically the resolution, would not have been possible without Gerrye Wong of the Chinese Historical and Cultural Project. Thank you so much. And Connie Young Yu, who has been a cornerstone in preserving our Chinese community history here in the city of San Jose. They will be speaking shortly. So thank you so much for making today possible and for helping us to be able to craft an honorable resolution. And now it is my pleasure to be able to welcome up the mayor of our city, Sam Liccardo, to present that resolution.
Thank you, Councilmember Peralez. and good afternoon. The one person that Councilmember Peralez did not thank was Councilmember Raul Peralez, and I want to thank him and his team for bringing this forward in this meeting. Thank you. I also want to thank all of my colleagues. I know that Councilmembers Davis and Cohen are present, unanimously supporting this resolution yesterday at the Council, and certainly want to thank all those who work so hard in the community to ensure that we do not forget the past. It was Faulkner who wrote, "The past is not dead, it is not even past." And yes, there have been public pronouncements 34 years ago, but it is really for every generation to reckon with the darkest corners of our collective history. And so it is our time to do so now. In addition to all those who have brought us to this moment, I want to thank all those who continue to work for justice today to ensure that this is not merely a reckoning of things past, but a change in our orientation to each other and as a community in the years to come. I noticed, for example, that District Attorney Jeff Rosen is here. I want to commend him and his team just a couple of weeks ago for bringing hate crime charges against a ring of 4 defendants involved in robberies of dozens of Asian American women. Thank you. I want to thank community members like Lily Lee, who's the author of Fire Scarred, and their work to keep this very important memory.
Yeah, I'm here!
Thank you, brother. I am now going to read the resolution. This is the first time I have ever read a council resolution with a public audience. There's a reason why it's the first time. Resolutions are often long. And politicians usually have a defined time limit beyond which we wear on the patience we know of our audience. But in this case, the medium is the message. And the length of this resolution and the facts contained within it are in fact very much part of this important apology. This is a resolution of the Council of the City of San Jose apologizing to Chinese immigrants and their descendants for acts of fundamental injustice and discrimination, seeking forgiveness and committing to the rectification of past policies and misdeeds. Whereas between 1849 and 1853, about 24,000 young Chinese men immigrated to California. And by 1870, there were an estimated 63,000 Chinese Americans in the United States, 77% of whom resided in California. Whereas Chinese immigrants were the primary workforce in developing Santa Clara County, as the fruit bowl of America, and San Jose was home to 5 Chinatowns, including the first Market Street Chinatown from 1866 to 1870, the Vine Street Chinatown until 1872, Second Market Street Chinatown, the one that was located here from 1872 to 1887. The Woodland Mills Chinatown, 1887 and 1902, and Heinleinville, lasting from 1887 to 1931. And whereas San Jose was a center of agriculture and Chinese immigrants were critical to the economy, industry, and progress of Santa Clara County, including in the manufacturing and heavy construction, notably as workers on the San Jose Railroad and the Santa Cruz Monterey line in the 1870s. And whereas Chinese immigrants were met with virulent racism and xenophobia, and the violence of anti-Chinese forces in San Jose from early on denied equal protection before the law. And whereas in 1869, the First Methodist Episcopal Church on 2nd and Santa Clara Streets, which taught Sunday school to Chinese immigrants, was burned to the ground. And the minister, Thomas Dunn, received death threats. And whereas after passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which denied naturalization to U.S. citizenship and restricted Chinese immigration, anti-Chinese acts became institutionalized and powered by federal, state, and local acts. And anti-Chinese conventions were held in San Jose, including the first state convention of the Anti-Chinese League of 1886. And whereas the policies, resolutions, and other actions of the City of San Jose and City Council directly contributed to the xenophobic discrimination and racial violence faced by Chinese immigrants, and whereas the City Council condemned all Chinese laundries on the basis they operated in wooden buildings after denying 14 Chinese laundry operators who filed a petition on January 14, 1886, requesting to continue their laundry businesses. And Mayor G.T. Settle broke the tie vote, and the motion before San Jose City Council to condemn the Chinese laundries was carried. And whereas the city made plans to remove San Jose's Market Street Chinatown for the building of the new City Hall downtown. And on March 25th, 1887, an order declaring the Chinatown at Market and San Fernando Streets a public nuisance was unanimously approved by Mayor C.W. Brayfogle and the entire City Council. And whereas the Market Street Chinatown succumbed to arson on May 4th, 1887, before official action could be taken, leading to the destruction of homes and businesses and the displacement of 1,400 members of the San Jose Chinese community. Whereas on June 2nd, 1887, after burning the Market Street Chinatown, when John Heinlein requested permits for building a new Chinatown on his property, his request was declared out of order by the mayor. And whereas on June 8, 1887, at a mass rally of citizens gathered on the corner of 5th and Jackson Street to protest the building of a new Chinatown, a resolution drafted by Mayor Brayfogle and the entire City Council was read to a crowd, stating that a Chinatown is a, quote, public nuisance, injurious to private property adjacent thereto, dangerous to the health and welfare of all citizens who live and have homes in its vicinity, and a standing menace to both public and private morals, peace, quiet, and good order, unquote. And whereas on July 25th, 1887, the City Council voted to allow only materials made by white labor in the construction of the new City Hall. Whereas in 1888, despite vehement opposition from the city and its citizenry, John Heinlein finished construction of the new Chinatown, which would be known as Heinleinville, and would last for 44 years until 1931. And whereas in 1949, the city voted to demolish the historic Yingxing Temple, the building, and to take over the property despite attempts by the Chinese community to save the temple as a historic landmark. And whereas the city stored the historic Yingxing altar under the municipal stadium, where it suffered damage from outdoor exposure for the next 40 years, until the Chinese Historical and Cultural Project was asked to work with the city on collection and maintenance of artifacts found in the building of the Fairmont Hotel in 1987. And whereas the Chinese exclusion laws were repealed in 1943 and subsequent federal legislation officially banned racial bias in immigration and citizenship, a fundamental step in the struggle for racial equality and justice in the United States, Whereas the Chinese Historical and Cultural Project built a replica of the historic temple building, installed exhibits of Chinese American history of the Santa Clara Valley, and gifted the museum to the city as a token of friendship and forgiveness from the Chinese American community in 1991. And whereas the recent rise in anti-Asian violence and racial discrimination demonstrates that xenophobia remains deeply rooted in our society, and whereas Asian Americans are still considered perpetual foreigners, and whereas the story of Chinese immigrants and the dehumanizing atrocities committed against them in the 19th and early 20th century should not be purged from or minimized in the telling of San Jose's history. And whereas the city must acknowledge and take responsibility for the legacy of discrimination against early Chinese immigrants as part of our collective consciousness that helps to contribute to the current surge in the anti-Asian and Pacific Islander hate. And whereas a genuine apology for the role of the city in this history and legacy is an important and necessary step in the process of racial reconciliation, and whereas an apology for grievous injustices cannot erase the past, but admission of historic wrongdoings committed can aid us in solving the critical problems of racial discrimination facing America today. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the City of San Jose apologizes to all Chinese immigrants and their descendants who came to San Jose and were victims of systemic and institutional racism, xenophobia, and discrimination. Council acknowledges the acts of fundamental injustice, terror, cruelty, and brutality, including the dismantling and destruction of the city's Chinatowns. It recognizes the contributions and resilience of the Chinese community and their commitment to fostering reconciliation and friendship. And we resolve to rectify the lingering consequences of the discriminatory policies of the city of San Jose, and to use this resolution as a teaching moment for the public to move forward toward justice for all. Adopted this 28th day of September 2021 by the following vote. Ayes, Mayor Sam Liccardo, Vice Mayor Chaffee Jones, Councilmember Sergio Jimenez, Councilmember Raul Peralez, Councilmember David Cohen, Councilmember Magdalena Carrasco, Councilmember Deborah Deb Davis, Councilmember Maya Esparza, Councilmember Sylvia Arenas, Councilmember Pam Foley, and Councilmember Matthew Mahan.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Please, another round of applause. Thank you for reading the resolution in its entirety. And thank you to all of you for listening intently. That is the first time as well I have stood by as we've read the entirety of a resolution, but I would agree that is the significance of this event, and those words were deeply, deeply felt. Thank you. I'm going to ask, before I introduce our next few speakers, if the speakers could please stand with the resolution for a photo.
Yeah, me too. Putting the plug in the Councilmember's theory. Aren't you guys here residents? That's great. Oh, no, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Connie Young Yu, an author and a descendant of Market Street and Highlandville residents.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Peralez. And to Mayor Liccardo, that was magnificent, a great reading of a resolution, and it was a total resolution. Hearing it all and having you here was like music to my ears, more like a symphony. I'd like to tell you what it means to me personally, deeply, because my grandfather was a resident of Market Street, Chinatown, and was made refugee by the fire, and my father was born in the new Chinatown of Highlandville. My grandfather, Wong, came to San Jose as an 11-year-old boy named Young Wong to work in Chinatown. His uncle had returned to the village called Longtan, which was Dragon's platform for a sojourn, and was preparing to go back to California, Gumsan Gold Mountain. To the Chinese, it was no longer gold that was the draw, but good wages in Gumsan. Wong begged his mother and father to allow him to go to America. He would work hard and send home his wages. Reluctant, they let him go. His mother rushed to sew work clothes for him. Wong and his uncle sailed from Hong Kong, arriving 6 weeks later in San Francisco, and taking the train over tracks laid by Chinese to one of the largest Chinatowns in California at the time. The Chinatown was known as the Plaza Chinatown because it was so centrally located, as you can see, close to the downtown plaza. There were more than a dozen grocery stores, a fish market, 3 restaurants, merchandising stores, shops with gambling rooms, shops making clothes and shoes, and a large theater where operas were performed by traveling troops. There was a vibrant, bustling place. Coming from a village in southern China to the San Jose's biggest Chinatown, Wong was in awe. And the food, it was so abundant. The produce, winter melon, green beans, bok choy, all grown by his kinsmen, and the fruits, he had never seen peaches so large, and he tasted strawberries for the first time. Chinese were indispensable to the gentrified life of San Jose. They were domestic servants, gardeners, laundrymen, cooks. At the age of 12, Wong was a houseboy for a white family who were kindly to him. But working outside of Chinatown had its perils. One time, a group of young toughs set upon him, throwing rocks. He ran as fast as he could to safety, but what hurt him most was that he lost his hat. In the next few years, Market Street Chinatown was hurting. Harassment of Chinese intensified with more ordinances, more restrictions, and no new workers coming into the valley. In 1885, Chinese were violently expelled from Eureka, and then there was a massacre of dozens of Chinese miners in Rock Springs, Wyoming. And later, Chinese were brutally driven out of Tacoma, Washington in a storm, and their homes and businesses burned. This was followed in Seattle by a massive anti-Chinese riot. The Chinese in San Jose heard horrific accounts from their Seattle kinsfolk who fled to San Francisco. Was it going to happen here? Not if, but when. In the afternoon of May 4th, 1887, as a teenager, Wong was working in the strawberry fields, and he could see the smoke from the fire of Chinatown. By the time he and his friends rushed back to home base, the Chinatown was an inferno, the hottest fire San Jose had ever seen. The Chinese fire brigade tried valiantly to put out the fire. The San Jose firemen fighting the blaze reported there was poor hose, meaning they couldn't get any water. The water tank was usually full, was nearly empty. Now the San Jose newspapers gave vivid reports a day later. The Mercury, the San Jose Daily Herald of May 5th, reported how Chinese were rescuing their possessions, including pets, dogs and cats. This is the quote, "Careful aid being given by the owners of the pets who seemed to be as solicitous for the safety of these creatures as for their own. Considerable amusement occurred when the Chinese were rescuing their Joss, their statue, from the flames. It took a brave and hard fight to do it, and when they came out panting and singed with soap, their soaked and scorched and bedraggled God, there was a shout from the spectators. The San Jose Daily Herald announced on May 5th, Chinatown is dead. It is dead forever. But the Chinese would not be driven out because 10 days after the fire, 11 Chinese merchants signed a lease agreement with John Hyman to build a new Chinatown on his pasture land. Each merchant putting down $300. The city was in furious opposition. The Heinleins and his 2 sons and 2 daughters who carried on his work were harassed and vilified. But they and the Chinese overcame every barrier that the city put up to wipe the Chinatown off the map. In 1888, Chinese had not 1 Chinatown, but 2. The Woolen Mills Chinatown and Heinleinville. Of all places where the Chinese were driven out and their homes torched, San Jose was the only city where the Chinese had a second chance and a Chinatown built for them that would endure. My grandfather returned to San Jose and brought his family to a safe, comfortable community. This fine new Chinatown was protected by an 8-foot-high fence. My father was born in a store in Chinatown, Heinleinville, and had the happiest of childhoods. He told me workers came in from all over the valley on the Lunar New Year, Da Ju, Moon Festival, and gave him lots of red envelopes. Heinleinville carried on the same wonderful traditions as in the Market Street Chinatown. After 44 years, though, the longest of any of the Chinatowns in San Jose, Heinleinville ended during the Depression, defeated finally by the Chinese exclusion law. But a generation of children grew up in the Chinatown as Americans. That's how I'm here. My father, John C. Young, became a community leader in San Francisco, founder of the Chinese New Year Parade, where he got his ideas from Heinleinville, and was colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. When people asked him, where did you come from? Where are you from, really? He'd answer proudly, San Jose, born and bred. Where is the Chinatown legacy now? There's a plaque in front of the Fairmont, placed there by Asian Americans for Community Involvement and the Association of Ethnic Chinese on the 100th anniversary of the burning of the Market Street Chinatown. The remains of the Market Street Chinatown are not lost or buried. They were brought by CHCP, led by Lillian Wong to Professor Barbara Voss and the archaeology department of Stanford University. They continue to study and learn from the burned artifacts. The heat of the fire has been determined that it could only be arson. In the near future, you can visit San Jose's newest park called Heinleinville Park. It is inside the development that's in progress, the development that you can see in progress, called 6th and Jackson Street, the site of Heinleinville Chinatown, which is now Japantown. John Heinlein also leased land to the Japanese, and Filipinos also came here later. So it became an Asian American community. Japantown now is a vibrant, multicultural neighborhood of San Jose, open to everybody and welcoming everybody. At Heinleinville Park, there will be a children's playground, a sculpture that symbolizes the struggles and triumphs of the people who live there, and a history pathway. I imagine that the Chinatown Market Street fire will be the first stepping stone. As out of the ashes rose a new community that would not be driven out. It was an end, but a beginning. On behalf of those who fought the good fight and continue to do so, I'd like to say to the city of San Jose, apology accepted and resolution embraced. Thank you.
pleasure now to introduce Gerrye Wong. She is the co-founder of the Chinese Historical and Cultural Project. Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm so proud to be here at this wonderful occasion because my heart is just bursting with happiness that at long last, our great city of San Jose is recognizing and acknowledging the too oftentimes sad treatment that was flung on the Chinese for too many years since they first came here in 1866. Think of that. It's been 155 years since Chinese pioneers first came to San Jose seeking new and better lives for their families and themselves. The people struggled against a very non-welcoming environment. The worst being the time when their largest Chinatown of 1,400 people was publicly banned by the city mayor and city council and ultimately burned to the ground. Now, I grew up in San Jose, and in the 1940s, I lived right down there in downtown 2nd Street in an old Victorian house that is now proclaimed a historic landmark. That distinction is not because I live there. I may look it, but I'm not that old. Seriously, I want to explain discrimination felt by the Chinese even at the time I was growing up. My family, like other Chinese, were not welcome to buy property here during World War II days when China was actually America's ally. Think about that. My father was managing the second largest department store in downtown San Jose, but yet he and his Chinese employees were not allowed to purchase a place near their work. When I tell my grandson Braden in the front row here, this unjust treatment was happening as recently as 70 years ago, it's hard for he and members of his generation to grasp the discrimination practices that even I felt. So I've often been asked, how did I, a fourth-generation Chinese American, get involved in my passion of preserving Chinese history? So let me tell you that way back in the mid-1940s when I was growing up in San Jose, as Connie said, the longest-lasting Chinatown, Islandville, was gone. But the Xingu Temple, which was being threatened at that time, was still there, ready for demolition by the city. My father was the spokesman who went before the then San Jose City Council pleading to save the historic building, and he won a short reprieve of 3 years. But sadly, during that time, we moved away, and with no other spokesman coming forward, the city destroyed the building. The last standing remnant of the San Jose Chinatown in 1950. Obviously, my father was very sad. He had failed in his job. But in 1986, a group of concerned Chinese citizens, upon learning of the discovery of artifacts found under this very same location here at the Market Street Chinatown, decided it was time to remember those strugglers. And I helped with many of my cohorts here to co-found the Chinese Historical and Cultural Project exactly 100 years after the fire. Yes, they all should take a bow, every one of them. Our goal was to establish a museum to preserve and present the Chinese history of San Jose, and our shining moment came in 1991 when we gloriously cut the ribbons and presented a replica of the Xingu Temple building to the city of San Jose as a token of ongoing friendship towards a new future of happier times. I sometimes think that maybe my dad up there was guiding my destiny to get that building rebuilt. And let me brag for all of my CHCP cohorts. Where are you? Raise your hand, all you CHCP people. Let me brag for all of them. That building stands proudly, welcoming over 1,000 children annually for the last few years because the CHCP funded field trips for schools in underserved communities in San Jose, and they came to visit the Museum of Chinese American History that is located still in San Jose's History Park. So my heart is just pounding. Where's my doctor? Just telling you about my dad's and my legacy, because I have a secret to tell you. He never told me about his role in trying to save the building until I told him 35 years later I was working to rebuild the replica. And only then did he tell me how sad and devastated he felt when it was demolished. So is that deja vu or what is it? I don't know. But on this 30th anniversary of our partnership with the city and opening of our museum doors, which was attended by then San Jose mayors Tom McHenry and Susan Hammer, I stand proudly beside our mayor today, Sam Liccardo, thanking our city council members for taking this long-awaited step towards reconciliation by this resolution of apology of a sad history of wrongdoings perpetuated against the Chinese citizens of the past. So on behalf of all of you, the Chinese American community of today, I thank you with a heart still beating, it's bursting this time, but with pride of all the communities that are joining together today with all of you in the spirit of friendship and reconciliation in a world of no more anti-Asian hate.
Thank you very much, Gerrye. Now I'd like to welcome up Santa Clara County Board Supervisor Otto.
I just want all of you to look around right now. Look around. See how many people out here. Give yourselves a huge round of applause for coming up with us. My name is Otto Lee. My Chinese name is Li Zhao Xiao. For those of you who speak Cantonese, is Lei Zhao Hiu. I'm honored to be an immigrant from Hong Kong, having served in the U.S. Navy, having served on the City Council in Sunnyvale. But I'm truly humbled and honored to say that I'm the first Chinese American serving on the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors today. It is truly a historical moment for the San Jose City Council to finally adopt this resolution after 130 years to apologize to the Chinese immigrants and the descendants for the city's role in the burning San Jose Chinatown. At that time, that San Jose implemented discriminatory policies that allowed for the atrocious act like this to happen. And although it was the sign of the times, right, it did lay the foundation of the systematic and institutional racism that our country is unfortunately still fighting today. Yet, even with these barriers and disadvantages created by government from over 100 plus years ago, the Chinese American community still prevailed through the resiliency and continued contribution to our country that makes the world we live in a much better place. Let's not forget the Market Street Chinatown that burned in 1887. And there were also a handful of other Chinatowns that were destroyed by these groups of Americans who were motivated by fear and hate, as well as any change to our community. Well, that change has finally come, and we have made progress for the past 100 plus years following those fires. From being granted the basic citizenship rights, fundamental rights to vote, Chinese Americans, as well as the entire Asian American community, will finally legally recognized as full Americans in this country. However, to be treated like every American is still an ongoing struggle. Even though it's not as severe as the Chinese Exclusion Act, when anti-Chinese sentiment was high, the COVID-19 pandemic has reawakened that familiar fear and hate amongst Americans who wanted to scapegoat and target fellow Americans on the basis of how they look. For a pandemic, that has nothing to do with Chinese Americans. As the first Chinese American to serve, as I said, as a supervisor, I am not only proud, but I will make sure the needs and rights of every Chinese, every Asian American will absolutely be protected and never, ever be forgotten. I believe today is a small step of moving forward to help diminish and eliminate hate and injustice throughout America. And I want to first of all thank Mayor Liccardo, Councilmember Raul Peralez, and your entire City Council for taking on this important historical step to apologize to Chinese Americans. And yes, apology accepted, but moreover, let's not forget there are still situations where professors like Dr. Wen-Ho Lee is still suffering with all the different type of prosecution from the FBI. And also the issue of Asian hate is still very, very new in our own towns. And we need to make sure that we stand by for each other, making sure that our rights are protected, and make sure everybody is going to be treated equal. Thank you very, very much for being here. 谢谢.
Thank you very much, Supervisor. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce a local, homegrown elected, someone leading the fight up at the state for us against anti-Asian hate, Assemblymember Evan Lowe.
Good afternoon. Auntie Gerrye, Auntie Connie, and to all of our woohoos or gongongs. This is a momentous day to be proud of San Jose. My name is Evan Lowe, and I stand before you as a state assembly member representing San Jose with the privilege of working for the people of San Jose because of people like Auntie Gerrye and Auntie Connie, Auntie Lillian, and my father, who is the past president also of the Chinese Historical Cultural Project. They instilled in me the importance of being involved in our community. I was born and raised in San Jose, product of Los Alamitos, Bret Harte, Leland High School, and San Jose State. And I'll share with you that it wasn't until Auntie Gerrye, Auntie Lillian, and my father said, you need to learn about your history. I didn't know and learn about this in my schooling. It was time ago. And that's why we're advocating right now in the state capitol. There's a bill before the state's governor right now on mandatory ethnic studies so that we can remember our history so that we do not repeat our past. It is also equally important to recognize the incredible solidarity of our public servants and the mayor and city council. Thank you, Mayor Liccardo. Thank you, Councilmember Peralez, and the entire city council for recognizing the importance of our community and our San Jose history. Let us remember a few facts as well. As we think about the upcoming census and recognizing that Asian Pacific Islanders consist of close to 35% of the city's population, it equally requires our engagement. I see phenomenal young individuals who are here today as potentially a learning opportunity. Let us not let this go to waste, but rather a call to action, that we have opportunities for us to get in the arena, to be involved. Just like a good Chinese boy, I was supposed to become a doctor like my father. And instead I became a politician. But I was voluntold by my dear aunties that you must be involved, you must participate, you must know your elected official, you must volunteer in a neighborhood association, you must know who your elected representatives are so that they can be held to account, but then also we can be in the highest offices of the land to ensure that this does not happen again. Not under our watch, not with allyship, never again. That's why when we think about what is the collective response to stopping AAPI hate, in the state of California this past budget, passing $150 million to go directly towards stopping Asian hate and community-based organizations throughout the entire state. Much of that happened, by the way, due to the result, again, of the incredible allyship of so many who have said this is not just rhetoric, but we stand in solidarity with the Asian Pacific Islander community, and we're going to be there. That's equally why it's important that we help our elected officials in San Jose support historic preservation and the great work of History San Jose, so that we can help ensure that our future generations, our current generations, know about their own history and their own identity. Finally, let me just say that the work is not done. Again, this is an incredible day that we hope that we can see other cities taking the lead and an example of our incredible leaders in the city of San Jose. But this cannot be done without their solidarity, without their allyship, and their true commitment to our Asian American and Chinese history, which is, by the way, San Jose's history and California's history as well. So when we leave today, let us reflect and reaffirm on our commitment to the past, to our past veterans, Asian American veterans, to our past grandparents who served and lived during the Chinese Exclusion Act, or the Alien Land Law of 1913, which forbid Asians from owning property in California. And most recently in this generation, stopping API hate. That is what is required of all of us. So let us use this opportunity to reflect and tell others, what will you do? What will you do to stopping Asian hate? What will you do to ensure that we won't have an opportunity to apologize, because it's not going to happen again? That is our commitment collectively as residents of San Jose, and we're entirely grateful to the city of San Jose for your commitment, for seeing us, for hearing us, and for apologizing to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evan. And that is our goal, to never have to apologize like this again. I'd like to say thank you to a couple other elected officials that did arrive before we wrap up. Wendy Sullivan, Morgan Hill School Board President, thank you for being here. And from the office of San Jose Councilmember Matt Mahan, the Chief of Staff Matt Cavedo, thank you so much for being here. We do have volunteers that are going to be passing out copies of the resolution that the mayor read off. Our volunteers will be passing those out if you'd like to gather one before you leave. Thank you. If our volunteers that have them could raise your hand, they'll be making their way around. So thank you very much for doing that. And now, if I could ask everybody that is in the aisle here to clear, we are going to end today's with a traditional lion and dragon celebration. In the spirit of healing and renewal, as the Assemblymember just stated, looking forward. It's our opportunity now for new beginnings here, new feelings. Please welcome the Dragon Summit Lion Dance Home CHCP Home the Dragon team, and thank you again to everybody for joining us today. Thank you.
museums there. There's a Portuguese museum, I mean, there's a British museum. The very first hotel in San Jose got relocated over there as well too. And every Christmas there's lights in the park. You have kids. No, Phelan is about 4 or 5 miles away from the city of San Jose announced a resolution apologizing for past discrimination. There were at least 5 Chinatowns that were torn down or burned and forced to be relocated. One of those Chinatowns used to be this site. I'm trying to find my boss.